Hi, welcome to Shakespeare Month for April 2018. And this month we're continuing with King Henry IV, Part 2. So we're going to pick up with this play right where Henry IV, Part 1 leaves off with that victory at that Battle of Shrewsbury. And I'm going to go through the plot pretty quickly. There's a lot of this plot that I don't really care for, and I'll skip to the parts that I find interesting and poignant. And I just want to say, I've been talking to some people. Someone was telling me, if I wasn't, and this is not just me, but, if I wasn't watching or, getting an introduction to a play before I watched it, I would have no idea what's going on. And that's me too. I watched this Henry IV Part 2 and I'm like, I don't remember who these guys are, and they're just talking about kind of political machinations, and it's hard to keep track of who's who. That's me too. I have to study it. So I don't just watch it and get everything. And I watch it and I study it and I still don't get everything. So if that's you also, that I think that's pretty normal. And I'm not going to remember specific names of some of these political guys in this synopsis either. But I'll just go ahead and catch us up to where everything is. So the basic thrust of this play is Henry IV is ailing and dies, and Hal is completing his transformation from party boy, irresponsible prince to noble, worthy king. So in the beginning of the play, it's right after the battle of the last play, we get some conflicting reports that King Henry is wounded and Hal is dead, and then we get the report that it's not Hal that's dead, it's Hotspur that's dead. So Hotspur's family, that faction of rebels, goes to fight, and I believe they go up to Scotland to join a rebellion. And at this point, Henry IV is fighting the rebels still. He's fighting in France, and he's fighting Glendower, which I believe was at the very beginning of the last play, who he had just won a battle with. So his military is spread very thin, which is very stressful to him, as you can imagine. Meanwhile, Falstaff, Hal's letting him take credit for killing Hotspur, so Falstaff is, I think he's, I don't know if he's got a position in the army now. I don't think he's a general, but he's something. So he's not doing that duty, though, and he gets conscripted by the Lord Chief Justice, I think, he's supposed to be raising an army for the king. He's got a responsibility, but of course he's not doing that. He's in the taverns being ridiculous, as always. And Hal is, to King Henry's dismay, still in London. He's afraid that he's going to go straight back to his, ways, hanging out with those lowlifes, and just that the moment of nobility that he showed during that battle is gone. So he's worried. He's talking to his younger sons about Hal. And Hal is in London with his friend Poins, the one who they had played tricks on Falstaff in the last play, but he's not seeing Falstaff as much. So they do their little routine of playing a trick on Falstaff. In this one, they go sneak up on him in the tavern in disguise, and they're going to spy on him. So that's pretty much the first part of what Hal's doing. Falstaff is also indebted to Mistress Quickly, the scroungy old woman who owns the tavern from the last play, and has been eating her out of tavern and home with his unpaid bar tab. So he's ordered to pay her back, which, who knows if he's going to do. But he's still hanging out there, and he's got a romance going with one of the prostitutes in that tavern. And King Henry is very stressed, very worried. He's worried about Hal, and that is it kind of exacerbating his stress. There's a really beautiful monologue in the first half of the play where he's talking about how he can't sleep, and he's wondering about, how many of my subjects are asleep at this hour. And I won't say it because I don't know it off the top of my head, but at the very end of that monologue, he says, "Uneasy lies the head that wears the crown," which is, I think, a beautiful sentiment of what a burden this responsibility is. And also, because of the way he became king, he overthrew a king, that he will never feel secure because he overthrew someone, so he's always afraid someone's going to overthrow him, and that just unease is with him. And then, of course, all that's going on with the military, with his son, and, he, I think, knows he's dying and is not sure that his son is going to be a good king. That's really weighing on him. So that's what he's going through. Now, I'll just get rid of the Falstaff part. He goes up to the north to conscript an army for the king, as he's supposed to do with his duties now. And he meets an old school friend, school chum, who helps him conscript this army. But when he's not looking, Falstaff and his sidekicks take bribes from people who don't want to join the army. So it's a ragtag group of guys that come up. So that's where he is until pretty much the end of the play, and then he comes back to court when Henry IV is dead and Hal is becoming crowned king. So that's Falstaff for now. Before that, though, Hal and Poins sneak up on Falstaff in the tavern, and they hear him saying that he thinks Hal is shallow, and he thinks Poins is, dumb, and, he's just kind of saying bad things about them to his prostitute girlfriend, and they confront him. And throughout this play, you really see Hal starting to distance himself from Falstaff. He kind of puts on I'm better than you. In just his station does not allow him to entertain Falstaff like he did before. And there's a part in the beginning where he gets a letter from Falstaff. He's hanging out with Poins, and I think in the letter Falstaff says something about Poins, wanting Hal to marry his sister. That's the reason he hangs out with him. And I love that moment, especially in the production that I recommend, which is the same cast as last month's, the Tom Hiddleston BBC Hollow Crown version. And he asks Poins, do I have to marry your sister? And I just get this sense that he knows that all his friends just want something from him and are opportunistic. And it's poignant, I think. Who does he have that really cares for him, that doesn't just want to be around him for the advantages of his station? And Falstaff, of course, is taking a lot of advantage of this. He thinks he's going to be his favorite when he becomes the king and, be rich and titled and all this. And so when you see Hal and Falstaff interact, it's not as much in this play as in the last one. It is very much you see them separating. And Falstaff talks a lot about being old in this one. There's kind of it's a little pathetic in the true sense of the word, that he feels himself getting older, and it kind of creeps into his carefree, irresponsible merriment. So Hal goes back to court. Henry is very sick, and by the time Hal gets to court, his father is sleeping with he has his crown on his pillow after he's had his, uneasy lies the head that wears the crown monologue, and his, advisors around him. So Hal comes in to sit watch over his father while he's sleeping, and he thinks he dies, and he takes the crown and goes into the throne room and contemplates what it means to lose his father and to have this responsibility thrust upon him. And that's also a really beautiful moment. If you watch this version, I recommend, where he's places the crown upon his head and is sitting on the throne and is tearing up because, the losing his father and also the fear of all he has to fulfill. And then Henry's not dead. He wakes up and he starts yelling, "Where's my crown? What happened?" And he comes and he lambasts Hal and says, "You want me to be dead, you just want the crown." And, Hal has to convince him, "No, I thought you were dead, and I took the crown and I was talking to it like it was an animate, a conscious thing, and I was, saying it was, my enemy because it killed you," or something metaphorical that I can't remember better than that. But it's a beautiful little scene. And he convinces his dad that he is not gunning for his death so he can be the king. And so then with Henry appeased, he starts giving Hal some advice on how to be a good king. And he tells him, "It's going to be easier for you, I hope, because, I took the crown from someone, you're inheriting it. So it's a little bit better. It's a little bit, I think he says gentler or something like that." And then he gives him some advice. He says, to unify everyone, because people have been rebelling against King Henry. He says, you need to focus your problems in the foreign lands, get everyone focused outside the country, and then, you won't have all these factions within the country trying to overthrow you. So he gives him some advice, and then he really does die. And Hal assures the court, his advisors, that he is done with his past bad behavior and he's going to be a good and noble king. So we go back to Falstaff. When Falstaff hears that Henry's dead, he rushes back to court because he's like, "My ship has come in, Hal's going to be the king, I'm going to have it made, he's, I'm going to be his favorite." And one more thing before I get to that. I just want to say, with all the military machinations that are going on, which is really hard for me to get through too, there's a faction that had grievances against the king in the first play, and Hal's younger brother and his advisors come upon them, meet with them, and they say, "We have these grievances, they haven't been addressed." Henry's younger son says, "Yeah, okay, we'll redress them, but let's disband our armies. We don't need to fight." So they send their armies home, and then they're drinking and they're toasting to this peace, and then Henry's younger son has them all arrested for treason because whatever their grievances were, they were coming up against the king. So that's some kind of clever political maneuvering to stifle this uprising, and it seems a little bit brutal, but it's pretty smart. So we don't have another big battle in this one. They squelch that problem in a different way. So now we come back to Hal inheriting the crown. So the Lord Chief Justice was giving Hal trouble in the last play, and he's worried that he's going to lose his job because now Hal's the king and he doesn't like him. And there's a really beautiful part at the end where he tells Hal, if he basically says, "If you were your father, how would you have wanted me to talk to you when you were behaving this way?" And Hal agrees that he did the right thing. He was just chiding him for not being what he should be. And Hal sees this and says, "Fine, keep your job." I think it's a really, not not necessarily metaphorical, but it really seems to be something talking about the nature of your higher and lower selves, which I think, I mean, to me, that's what a lot of this place is. You know, a lot of what this play is. Hal is stepping into his true estate. And for a while, you know, especially in the last play, especially in this play, he knows he's got to make that full transition to his true state and his true responsibility, but he's kind of grudgingly going there. So I really, really love that about this. I mean, both of these plays. I love that journey. So Hal, when he is finally having his coronation, assures everyone, you know, my old life is over. I'm going to be, you know, I'm going to be a worthy king. I'm going to be, you know, worthy of the majesty of this state. And at the very end, Falstaff, he like breaks ranks to address the king. I think he calls him my dear boy or something like not very respectful. And Hal turns to him and basically says, I don't know you, old man. And completely shuns him, basically. And he says one of my favorite lines. Since the first time I became familiar with this play, I love this line that he says to Falstaff. He tells him, presume not that I am the thing I was. And I love that line. So short, but so profound to me. I mean, that line gives us permission to continuously evolve and to continuously become more of what we are, and to not be held by the reality of one moment in our evolution. I mean, I'm speaking collectively, but I love that line so much. It's just so, to me, it's so inspiring, and it's so, and the way he says it is kind of haughty, a little harsh, but he really is drawing that line between his, like, to be simplistic, his higher self and his lower self. And the divorce is complete at this point. And at the end of the play, at the end of the version, I recommend you see Falstaff with tears in his eyes. You know, he's kind of lost what he thought. He bet his friend £1,000 that he was going to be Hal's favorite, and which he loses and says, you know, I'm good for it, in Falstaff fashion. And was counting on the favors, was counting on his own advancement. And their relationship, someone was saying on the Heart Center message board, you know, does Falstaff like Hal? Because he takes credit for things, he slanders him, and I was thinking about, I think, yes, there, especially in the first play, there was affection, but it's kind of like the kid you're friends with because they lived in your neighborhood, but if you moved away, you're not going to keep in touch with them. I kind of feel like that's more the dynamic with Hal and Falstaff. Or, you know, it's people, you know, if you at a certain point of your life are into like an activity or like partying, it's like you just hang out with the other people who do that. But if you change, the friendship is circumstantial. And so while in part one, you know, there is that moment in the tavern where there's this acknowledgement of not only what Falstaff and Hal mean to each other, but kind of what their time together, like how fun and irresponsible and carefree they were together, about kind of a mourning of that. But I don't think they're true best friends in their hearts. I mean, Falstaff for sure is always trying to take advantage of everyone around him, especially Hal, and is just lucky that he had favor with him when he did. So I think the really beautiful thing, even though it takes a long time to get there in this, I feel like this play's a little baggy. It's just, it takes a long time to do the separate things it's doing with Falstaff and the tavern and Hal and the king, and it's all kind of I don't know, it doesn't seem as, the structure to me doesn't seem as tight as the part one. But just Hal's kind of, he got really far in the first play, and then in this one, he completes that journey, leaving his old self behind and embracing his responsibility and his true self and his true responsibility, and the nobility of who he is, how he's carrying himself. And I think that is a really useful concept for initiates, which anyone watching these plays is going to get on some level subconsciously, that journey, which I think is really timeless and beautiful. And we'll see how Hal does as king when we get to Henry V. I don't know that I'm going to keep, I think we might take a break for a little while before we get back to the Henriade. There's 2 more plays in the Henriade, so we'll see how he does. Spoiler alert, he's a good king. But that journey towards that responsibility, that adulthood, that becoming the royal version of yourself, and leaving those old things behind. He can't keep Falstaff in his life. And I'm sure all of us have been through something like that, where you just realize something that fit in your life at one time just doesn't anymore with how you evolve, or how the situation evolves. And I guess that's natural in a way. So yeah, as I was watching this play, I wasn't enjoying it as much as the last one, but now that I'm thinking about it and telling you about it, I do really like the themes. My favorite parts are, of course, the confrontation between Hal and Henry IV right before he dies. I love that part. And this whole end journey with Falstaff. And then in the beginning when you see Hal's kind of, his friends are all trying to take advantage of him. I'll wrap this up. I just want to say one thing about Falstaff. I know he's a really popular character, and I've heard some people say, I don't like him, I don't get it. And I think it's all his little one-liners. There's when he's being sought after in the beginning of the play for not doing his military job, whatever he's supposed to be doing, and he's calling this guy who's trying to arrest him, he's saying oh, you're old, us young people, blah, blah, blah. And it's just, he's just always shooting off at the mouth. And I think it's listening to a song a lot, you get certain lyrics stuck in your head, and he says a lot of funny things, but I think when I'm just watching the play, I'm not hanging on his every word, but all the little interchanges with him are really funny if you care to pay that much attention. So it kind of depends on how much you like wordplay and all that. I don't particularly care for him. I think this actor does a really good job, though. But yeah, he's a really popular character, and I'm sure, being kind of a drunken fool, he is witty. He's a Weisenheimer, and and he's always trying to get away with something, and people like characters like that. So maybe he played better a couple hundred years ago, but I don't particularly care for him either way. So if you don't like him, that's, I'm sure you're in good company. I love, of course, my point of interest in these plays is really Hal's journey, and I love someone who's trying to be good. I think that's the most fascinating thing, and not everyone thinks that's interesting. But I will leave it there, and I hope you enjoy Henry IV Part 2. I'm recommending the same version. It's a different episode of The Hollow Crown, the BBC version. And I do want to say, I know it's easily available to rent digitally, but also it was depending on what kind of TV or cable you have, it may come on like BBC America. And also it should be pretty available if you have a local library you use to rent from there. So anything I recommend, I would check libraries if you don't want to do something digitally and, you have time. because a lot of these things are going to be widely released unless they're the obscure YouTube versions that I post below. So I hope you enjoy this play, and I will see you next month. Bye!